Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning and welcome to the program. Okay, who dialed up the clouds and the rain today? It's okay. It's okay. We're ready to go. We've had some really nice days. It's been a really good summer so far, and I'm hopeful that we're going to continue on to this, especially since tomorrow is the solstice, summer solstice, 24 hours of daylight up in Fairbanks, which means not only the big solstice celebration in the streets of the old Bankstown, but also the midnight sun game going to be played tomorrow and everything else. So it's that celebration of summer and the perennial the perennial sun worshiping that's going on out there. Oh man, I don't know. I was sitting in the backyard last night after I got home, and it's one of those rare occasions where I got home and everything was a little quiet around the house, and so I slipped out into the backyard with the dog and threw the ball for him a little bit, and just sat in the sun and in the chair and just kind of relaxed and had a little music and a little quiet time and a little nature, and it was just beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. So I hope you're taking a few moments for yourself this summer season and enjoying it for just to slow down for a second. Yesterday, I've had a very busy 3 weeks, and yesterday was nice at the end of the day to just kind of hang out and do our thing. Okay. What do we got today on the program? Well, today we're going to be talking a lot about education. We're going to talk about education. We're going to talk about the dangers of federal money overall, but specifically in education. And then in hour 2, we're going to discuss this whole situation in practice with Aaron Smith, who is the education. He is the director of education reform at Reason Magazine, and the Reason Foundation, rather. And he's got an article up over at Reason doing kind of a recap of what happened with the K through 12 schools that with the COVID monies, and what is the effect of that on K through 12 education spending across the country. And it was a fascinating article, and I've been trying to get Aaron on for a couple weeks here ever since he wrote the article. And he's going to be joining us this morning to discuss it. I've already posted up links in the chat room with his article. So if you want to check it out, you can do it, or you can just go over to Reason Magazine and type in Aaron Smith. Aaron Garth Smith is the sobriquet here up on the screen. So if you want to go take a look at that and read it before we get a chance to talk to Aaron in hour 2, this would be a good time to get that done. Here in hour 1, I've got just a couple of headlines, but I do want to spend a bit of time talking about the dangers of that federal money and what it means for every, at every level of government, every level of spending, every department, every division. What does it mean? And we're going to see what you have to think about that as well. We'll take some comments from the chat room and extrapolate out on that and as well. Couple big headlines though that we'll get started with here this morning. And one thing that I just don't understand. I don't understand the new, or I guess not new, but the latest generation of protesters of a variety of things. Now, I mean, again, we don't normally do anything, national or world, around here. It's just, it's not normally my thing. I want to focus more on Alaska. But interestingly enough, this stuff has even caught my attention as we've watched over and over and over again in various areas and various places, groups of protesters doing things to try and, in their mind, highlight the importance of their cause. Now, that could be an issue of climate change. It could be, some kind of pro-Palestinian march in some downtown area. It could be, the blocking of the streets or the roadways. It's all these things that we're seeing that are making big headlines, but they're really not winning the hearts and minds of the average person. We've seen when they shut down, for example, they shut down the Golden Gate Bridge, right? That was one of the big ones in San Francisco. They shut down the Golden Gate Bridge. There were areas around Seattle's airport where they shut down the highways. It happened in outside of Chicago, where all these protests were going on. In many cases, it was about the war between Israel and Hamas. Or in some areas, it was about the climate change issue. And of course, the one that really blows my mind is this group of climate protesters called Just Stop Oil. That's that's the name of the group. And I've been watching some interesting videos on this simply because I'm fascinated by the mindset of people like this, where they have literally plonked down in the streets of places, in England and other places. This is the crew, and in Europe, parts of Europe, this is the crew where they were gluing their hands to the pavement with some kind of industrial adhesive. I mean, like super glue. and things like that. And then at one point, they literally had to, in some cases, chisel the pavement out from underneath the person's hand and take them with these chunks of concrete or pavement to the doctor to have surgically remove these things from their hands. These are also the same group of people that were had splashed soup on the Mona Lisa or other paintings, Van Gogh's, and doing stuff like this. Well, their latest incident involved spraying orange paint on Stonehenge. Now, Stonehenge, it is obviously this is one of the most famous prehistoric sites in the world, right? It's over 5,000 years old. So I don't think a little paint is going to necessarily hurt it. But who are you trying to how do you think this kind of behavior is going to affect your movement? Right? I mean, how do you think this kind of behavior is going to look to people who you're trying to convince? I mean, this is a hearts and minds. I mean, I work in I work in advertising. I work in kind of the sales arena as well. And so I understand that you have to, present something to someone that changes their minds or, attempts to convince them in a buying cycle to choose your product over another product or everything else. And all I could see every time somebody does something like this, I see, them parking in a busy street. And what was the ones where the they put those drums where they put their arms in the drums and they linked hands crossing the street and they put the drums in and it looked like initially that the drums had been filled with they put their hands in the sides of these drums and that their hands were filled or that everything was filled with concrete. And it turned out that it was anyway. I mean, what are you trying to do? Is this just the unemployed, fatherless behavior? That's my favorite quote from a one of my favorite YouTubers is Decoy Voice. If you haven't gone and watched this kid, he is pretty spot on. But he talks about the unemployed, fatherless behavior. And that's exactly what it seems like, that regardless of the age of these people, they're like children throwing temper tantrums. You're not convincing any. When you are radically, in the cases of like the street things, if you are radically inconveniencing the average person and blocking the streets so that they can't get to work, there's a pretty common video that you've seen probably around of a New Yorker getting out saying, "I've got to go pick up my child." That he's ready to throw down with these people. He's like, I'm going to run you over. I'm trying to get to my child across town and you're holding me up. I mean, do they think that this behavior is winning the hearts and minds to their crowd? Is doing anything to convince anyone who's watching this that their position is right? Or is it having exactly the opposite effect? Regardless of what they're protesting about. Again, whether it's climate change or, stopping the oil companies or, being a vegan or again, the Palestine, the Israel-Palestine conflict, whatever it is. When you pull up outside of a Jewish hospital and you're, where people are in various forms of palliative and hospice care and everything else, and you're shouting death to Israel or you guys are whatever it is. There was some really ugly stuff outside of one of the more famous Jewish hospitals in New York. And I'm like, do you think you're convincing anyone? Is it for Is it for fame? Is that what you're, I mean, are you looking for the fame of it? Do you truly believe what you're doing? Or are you going along with the crowd because it's the in thing to do? These protests on all the university campuses are a whole other thing. I mean, there's been video after video where somebody's gone up and asked the students, what exactly are you protesting here? In the war in Israel, the war, and they just, there's dozens of videos out there where they just don't know. They know their friends in the crowd are for something or against something, and so they're there. So is it lemming behavior? That's just with the protest. But again, this idea that painting, and they go on to say on their website, well, the paint is just orange corn flour. The pigment is made from orange corn flour and will wash away in the rain. Just like they slapped tomato soup on a famous Van Gogh painting or on the Mona Lisa or whatever it was. They also took responsibility for smashing the glass protecting the original copy of the Magna Carta. What do you expect people to be sympathetic to your cause because you're doing these things? Again, to me, it smacks very much of some kid having a temper tantrum. That's all I can that's all I can do. I just don't understand the mindset behind this. And by the way, I'm not the only one. There are plenty of videos out there of people in Europe, especially where Stop Oil has been Just Stop Oil has been very aggressive in their campaigns. There are people that just aren't taking it anymore. And they're just dragging people off the street. They're dragging protesters off the street when the protesters lock arms or whatever. There's people that are punching and kicking. There's one video of a bus that basically just started slow rolling and said, we're going to roll right over. I mean, it was just like, you're going to play stupid games, win stupid prizes. It's crazy stuff. But I just wanted to comment on it. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I just don't understand what they think they're going to accomplish with that. Because I don't think they're winning any new people to their cause. Or maybe they're winning the same kind of crazy people who just want to watch the world burn. I'll get my way or else. Yeah, I don't know. But it just, again, it's like a kid throwing a temper tantrum, throwing themselves on the floor, and I want it now kind of thing. It's crazy. All right, we got to go. The Michael Luke Show, Common Sense Radio.
What is that?
Common Sense. Regularly heard on American radio. Michael Duke Show. Radio.
Okay, I just switched back over to the comments page here, and Rick's like, you don't know what our thoughts are? Read the comments. Well, I meant everyone's thoughts, not just yours. But, well, I mean, there you go. What are you going to do? Good morning. Speaking of education reform, what's Corey DeAngelis up to? You know, Brian, that's a good question. I've tried to get him on the program several times. And then I was on, what was I? I was on vacation. I was somewhere. I was working. I wasn't on vacation. I was doing something. I was away from home. And he sent me a text, but it was like there we go. Oh, here you go. He sent it to me. Rescuing Your Kids from Radicals. He's going to be in Anchorage for a book signing on July the 8th. Yes. So anyway, he's going to be on the program. Basically what is happening, he sent me this thing and I've been trying to get a hold of him for a long time. Anyway, we're going to, we will have him on the program here in the next couple of weeks before he shows up, because he's going to be in Anchorage for a book signing on the 8th of July. Corey DeAngelis. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Dad. Oh, are you talking to my dad or your dad? Is your dad in here? Hi, Dad. My dad's in here. Ryan says, you mean protesting in the American city streets has no impact around the world? I mean, protesting in any city in this regard, in this way, has no impact anywhere. Must Read has a new poll out. Peltola, Begich, Dahlstrom. Begich is at 85%. Well, I mean, yeah, it's an echo chamber. Just like this show is an echo chamber of its own making. Of course, Must Read is going to be probably 85% for Begich. I'm interested to see whether or not I'm interested to see the straw poll that took place at the state convention, because I didn't see the actual numbers on that, although I heard that Begich in that straw poll that was conducted by Must Read at the statewide convention was also good. Brian says, like toddlers with a full diaper, they're unhappy and uncomfortable, but don't know why. Ancient aliens are going to be pissed. If not missed, but pissed. This is Chris talking about the Stonehenge. Ancient aliens are going to be pissed. Who has alien retaliation for apocalypse bingo? Right? You don't mess with our sacred sites. Where would they find a decent enough piece of road to glue themselves to in this state? Well, I don't know. I don't. Then there were the peyote cops in Nevada. Yeah, did you watch that? The protesters outside. That's one of my favorite scenes of the protesters, because the tribal police there, they give zero about your protest. They had a trailer across the road and the police just rammed it right off the road with people there and everything else, and then arrested everybody. Like tasers out, like, oh, it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. Yeah, encouraging. It's like bringing students to the Capitol, encouraging them to bang on office doors and holler BSA, BSA. That's even worse. That's even worse. All right. We gotta go. Let's continue the Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Let's do this thing.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
And Kevin McKay brought up the worst example of these kind of mindless protests. Like, how do you think he said, like bringing students to the Capitol and encouraging them to bang on office doors and holler BSA, BSA. I mean, I thought they were just quietly standing in the hallways as some kind of form of intimidation, but they're actually yelling in the hallways and banging on office doors. How is that going to convince anyone? Again, I'm all for the answer to speech you don't like is more speech. I'm all for free speech. But when you start to impinge on the rights of others, In the cases of the traffic, that's like the right to free travel. People are just trying to get to work. People are just trying to do their things. The one lady, there were several emergencies that were stopped when ambulances were trapped in these big traffic jams and couldn't get through. And in one case, somebody had to be hospitalized. Got people delivering babies in ambulances because they can't get to the hospital, et cetera, et cetera. And they give zero craps about that. Like zero craps. We're having our moment. It's our right to block you on this. It's your right to protest. It's your right. It's not your right to impede the process of everyone else going about their day. I mean, I am all about freedom. I am all about free speech. I'm all about being able to shake your fist and protest at things that you're upset about. But your rights end where mine begin. So if you're blocking me from being able to go about my daily life and free travel and everything else, we gonna have a problem. Because just because you're mad about something or are upset or want to try and get your point across does not allow you to essentially hold me hostage in those situations. And the fact that in many of these communities, the police are reticent to enforce the law, and whether that's a jaywalking law, obstructing traffic law, public disturbance law, whatever it is, just because they're reticent to do it doesn't mean that what they're doing is legal or right. So again, explain to me, talk to me like I'm 5. How does this help your cause? We just don't know. It doesn't. It just doesn't help their cause. So it's one of those, it's one of those things. I just, that I do not understand. And then the destruction part, where they go to works of art and they throw stuff at works of art. They smash the glass on the Magna Carta. They throw paint on Stonehenge, which probably the least effective of all those things. I mean, it's Stonehenge. It's been here 5,000 years. I don't care if you sprayed it with epoxy paint. They said, well, it's corn flour. It'll wash off. I don't care if you put epoxy paint on that thing. It's not going to affect it. In another 5,000 years, it'll still be there. That paint will be long gone. But what are you trying to do? Is it the horror? Is that what you're going for? The horror, the jump scare of those kind of things? I don't know. We're talking about, Fat Ray says, we're talking about children who weren't raised right. No, we're talking about adults who weren't raised right. We're just talking about people who just weren't raised right. Unemployed, fatherless behavior, as Decoy Voice says. That's what we're looking at. It's just astounding. Unemployed, fatherless behavior. All right. What are some of the other stories that I wanted to talk about as well? A bear attack in the Portage Valley. Did you see this? This was an interesting piece. And it always raises my question about, people getting too comfortable thinking that just because you're in a campsite, just because you're at a Park Service campground or a state campground, somehow that means that you are automatically safe because it's some kind of, invisible fence of civilization there in the wilderness. And when I read stories like this, I'm like, what was going on? The Forest Service has now closed down one of the campgrounds in the Portage Valley. It'll be closed down to users of soft-sided campers and tents until the 28th of June, after a man and a woman were attacked by a bear, a black bear, in a tent at a campsite in Willowwalk Campground early Friday morning. The woman was injured. They woke up around 2:30 to a bear biting and scratching at their tent. The bear caused injuries to the woman's face, and she was treated at the hospital. The injuries were not life-threatening. The bear left the area shortly after it injured the woman, and they have since closed the campground. They said that the campers did nothing wrong. There was no food items. They'd policed the area. They'd done everything right, and it's not clear what prompted the rare encounter. And every time I read something like this, all I can think of is, you're in Alaska, you're in the wilderness. Now, granted, you're in a public campground, federal or state, but that does not put a laser shield around the area. There's still going to be wildlife. And I've never camped on a federal campground. I don't know if they've got a thing about guns or not, but why would you go out and go camping without an ability to defend yourself from a bear in this regard? I mean, if a bear's starting to rip my tent up, I don't know. I think people just forget that Alaska will kill you if you're not paying attention. If you're not, and even if you are, the potential is there that Alaska will kill you. Just one of those things. So anyway, if you're planning on doing some camping, especially down in the Portage Valley, you best bring a camper or an RV or a trailer, because you ain't getting in until after the 28th of June to do that, because bears. And apparently they like them when you're in your sleeping bag and in your tent, because it's like eating a burrito. That's what I heard. I heard those burritos are delicious. That's what I heard about. A little more information on the statewide races, and specifically about the dropping out of Republican Bill Thomas. Remember, I talked about this here earlier in the week, where it was being whispered around that Bill Thomas was going to have to drop out of the race, basically saying he didn't have time to fish and to campaign. And I kind of questioned why he would have done that. Why would he make that decision now? Well, it turns out that he's had some issues, mechanical troubles with his fishing boat. Essentially, he said, I'm a commercial fisherman first, and my engine's not running. He said when he was reached by phone on Monday, I can't afford to go campaign while I'm trying to make a living fishing. And so apparently the engine in his boat blew up, and he's desperately trying to get it all put together. And he and his wife commercial fish together. And I could see as how that would throw a real spanner in the works. And so that was the reason why, I suppose if you were going to go out, just go commercial fishing, everything's going to be fine. But the second something like that happens, I could see that. I could understand why that might cause a problem for you. So that was the reason that Bill Thomas dropped out of the race. Little better reporting from James Brooks over at the Alaska Beacon than what we were seeing on the ADN or Must Read or anywhere else. At least giving us a reason as to what's going on. Okay, coming up next, we're going to dive into this discussion about the dangers of federal money. And there are dangers there, folks. It is it's the worm in the hook. It's the play yard pusher who's like the playground pusher who's the first taste is free, right? It is that dangerous. It really is. And we're going to talk about the effects of that in places like education and the extraordinary measures that can happen in those situations. We're going to continue here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Back with more right after this.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Hey, the bear was merely protesting, says Brian. That's what they... He's just protesting. You can't interrupt him. You can't give him his, My first thought, too, both Greg and Bill says that they probably had food in the tent, but according to the Rangers, they didn't. But, dragon's breath will teach a bear, says Greg. Oof, nothing better than scorched bear fur. Woo! Teresa said Rangers used to tell people that the Blackies consider people as food, i.e. they want to eat people. Oh, man. Did you hear that? Christopher Robin is having a party in Girdwood. There you go. Just say no to federal dough. Was he supplying the honey? Okay. Yeah, absolutely, Donna. That's exactly it. I mean, that's the whole... Donna just gave you the moral to my story before I even got to it, but that's the moral to the story. That, we've become accustomed to this. Oh. Goodness. Hey, look at that. 6 o'clock club member. I'm a member of the 6 o'clock club. Did you know that? All right. I forgot I was wearing this morning. People. This is Bill. Bill, I love you so much sometimes. This is the protesters. That's what they need. All they're doing is making themselves look stupid and pissing off normal people that are on their way to work or trying to enjoy life outside of work. Yeah. I mean, again, I'm trying to understand the mindset of these people that they continue to think, oh, we're winning. I mean, what brain donor came up with the idea of let's go park ourselves in traffic? That'll sure to convince them to our cause. I mean, maybe they're of the school of thought that any press is good press, that bad press or doesn't matter. It's all good stuff. I don't know. You forgot, Michael. The issue is never the issue. The issue is the revolution. Well, probably that. I mean, that it sounds a little jaded, but bear savvy publications say fight back if a black bear attacks. It wants to eat you. Yeah, I'm going to shoot it in the face, man. I mean, I don't understand why. Are you wearing the t-shirt? Am I wearing the t-shirt that says just say no to government dough? No, that's a black t-shirt. This is the 6 o'clock club t-shirt. See? 6 o'clock club t-shirt. That's what it is. But I was wearing that t-shirt Monday. I think I was wearing it Monday. I was wearing it Monday. That's when I was wearing it. Just say no to government dough. Okay. Is this the beginnings of a terror program for politicians? We need a federal money sniffing detective dog. I think so. I mean, really, it really is. Just say no to drugs, kids. And just say no to drugs. And in this case, the drug is all that federal money. That's what it is. Just say no to all that federal dough. Because it's the same kind of thing. Yeah, it's a thing for sure. Yeah, the 6 o'clock club shirts are pretty nice. Although I will say, I was thinking this morning that I would like it to be a little bigger. I got to figure out a way to get it to blow up on the thing, the deal. Get all the fuzzy wuzzies off of it. Anyway, luckily, I mean, most of the t-shirts that I get, I've been trying to find the perfect t-shirt material. I've tried the different types, and I'm looking for the right one. We need a DARE program in Juneau. Well, I thought all that federal money was just free money, says Ron. Yeah, Yeah, true. Craigslist in 2020 had ads for protesters wanted. Yeah, I mean, how many of them are just paid agitators? I mean, you have no idea, no way of knowing. All I do know is, especially the people who are out there destroying, works of art, they chopped up the pavement to try and get them out of and all that other kind of stuff. Those people, you just put them in jail. You just put them in the jail, and, that's what you do. That's what you do. All right. Let's proceed ahead, shall we? I'm feeling it. I got Aaron Smith coming up here in hour 2. We're going to get started, and we'll go from there. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Okay. Let's continue here. My topic for today, which I've been working my way around through all the other stuff and getting to. My topic for today is the dangers of federal money. And I've been harping on this subject for 25 years on the air, because I believe this is one of the most dangerous things that any state can fall victim of. And we here in the state of Alaska have not just fallen victim of it. I mean, we've embraced it. We wallowed in it. It used to be the whole thing with, with Don Young and Ted Stevens, when they were the dynamic duo down there, and Frank Barkowski was the third guy, the third musketeer. And they were all bragging about bringing home all that government bacon, right? They were porking up the bills. I mean, Ted Stevens used to be famous for earmarking bills and stuffing it. It was the stuffing it full of stuff for Alaska. All that free money. First and foremost, we all understand, I think intellectually, if not honestly, at least with ourselves, that there is no such thing as free money. Somebody's paying for all those dollars that are going into the various things that are going on out there. I mean, that's the first thing we have to understand. The first thing we have to understand is that there is no such thing as free money. Somewhere, somebody paid into the government coffers at the point of a gun. Oh, that's just hyperbole. No, literally, if you don't pay it, they will send guys with guns to your house and put you in a cage. Right? That's the end result. It's literally the threat of coercive force and violence that makes them take all that money. Oh, taxation is theft. Okay? So I'm just start there. If you want to know where I'm coming from, start there. Oh, you're being hyperbolic. It's just you're just being, shock jockey. You're just doing. No, again, if you don't think that it is coercion and force, just don't pay your taxes on whatever. Your property, your house, your income. Guys with guns will show up and put you in bracelets and take you to the jail. Or they will evict you from your house. If you still refuse to leave, then they'll do that. And maybe they'll shoot your dog on the way out. I mean, it's just, this is what happens. So the first thing we have to understand in this is that it's not free money. I mean, that's the thing. It is not free money. It's tax money. It was stolen from somebody else for the good of the community and given to us at some point. Again, taxation is theft. Just throwing that out there. But see, there's a danger to this, and it looks a lot like a bribery. That's the thing. You know, you could look at this kind of federal dollars in two different veins, as kind of two different models. The one model that I like, first of all, you could just look at it as pure bribery. Hey, if you want all these federal road funds, you'll do what we say. Right? We've seen that in Fairbanks. The air quality in Fairbanks, the EPA keeps moving the needle on what the air quality is supposed to be. First, it was PM 10, and then it was like PM 6, and then it was PM 3, then it was PM 2.5, and now they're talking about what, 1.5 or whatever. They keep moving the needle on these air quality issues. And they keep threatening, and a lot of it has to do a lot of it in Fairbanks, the air quality issues are climatic. They have nothing to do with what necessarily is being burned or what is being done. It has to do with the inversion and the fact that the hills wrap around, and there's a whole bunch of other things. And essentially what you want people to stop doing is just stop. I mean, they don't want people to burn natural gas there because that can create some of that. It's a thing. They keep moving the needle. But what they really do is then they said, well, if you don't do what we say, then we'll withhold these highway funds from your area. When I was on the assembly and they said that, I said, go ahead. Now, the assembly didn't have any road powers or anything, but I'm like, go ahead. What are we talking about here? We're talking about $3 or $4 million in federal funds to maintain and they weren't building any new highways. They were maintaining highway. So we're talking about $3 or $4 million. Okay. How much are we paying to comply with this? Tens of millions of dollars were being expended to try and comply with this over, $3 or $4 million in highway funds. So the first one is coercive. The first one is, it's a bribe. It's either arm twisting or it's a bribe. The second model that we're talking about, and kind of the one that I think is probably more accurate, is the playground pusher. Hey, little kid, want some candy? First taste is free. First taste is free. And then once you get them hooked on it, they'll do anything you want. Anything you want, they will do it. And that's how we are today. That every dollar that gets spent in this state gives them, it's the worm on the hook. Oh, you can have this money, but if we give you this money, you've got to do what we say on X, Y, or Z. Oh, we'll give you this money, but if we give it to you, then we have primacy on certain issues or certain things, and you've got to play it by our rules instead of being able to exert and be sovereign as a state to make your own decisions. The minute you take this money, you basically give up that right and that sovereignty, and we tell you what to do with it. Or in the case of what we're talking about now, they had all that free money during the pandemic, and they gave it out to all the various states. But in a surprise move, the U.S. Department of Education, which should be abolished, by the way, put an additional set of restrictions and requirements on the money. The heart of this disagreement is over a new provision to pandemic-era education grants that came through what they call extraordinary federal guidance. The idea behind it is that the federal government would give out huge grants so long as states made sure that they were distributed fairly, and the federal government was the one that decided what that fairness looked like. They call it maintenance of equity. Austin Reed, the National Conference of State Legislators' lead federal education policy analyst, said the maintenance of equity provision is an unusual and, in some ways, extraordinary federal authority. Typically, states have the authority over how they fund education. But in this case, if you want our lucre, you got to do what we say. It's another way to insinuate federal authority on things that should normally be reserved to the states. And it's one of the only legal ways they are able to do it because the Constitution prohibits them from being able. But if they give you money and you accept the money, then you have accepted the provisions that they provided it under, then you've given them, you've willingly turned over the authority to the federal government in this regard. And this is how they supplant the local authority around the world. First of all, they take your money at the point of a gun. Taxation is theft. And then they turn around and they give the money back to your community, but they do so with hooks and requirements and concessions to their authority, and they take more power. And they take more primacy over what should be local, state, city, community issues that the states are better off making those decisions on. But now we're so hooked on it. Now we just don't know, how would we ever live without these federal funds? How would we ever live without this money in education? How would we ever live without this money in roads or defense or whatever it is that they're spending the money on? How would we make it if we didn't have this free lucre from the government? Well, how did they live for a couple hundred years before we got to this point? How did they live before they had the national income tax and they were taking the money and everything else? How did they do it? Well, they made it. But that is the danger. Every time you hear this idea of federal spending, you realize it's going to bribe your elected officials, your leaders, the nonprofits, the NGOs, your communities, your cities, your boroughs. It's going to bribe them into acceding to more federal authority. I mean, just let that sink in for a minute. And, extraordinary federal guidance, things that were normally left to the state. That's what this is all about. It's about a slow but subtle, steady takeover of local communities, governments, state governments, when everybody's got to look to Uncle Sugar for everything. That's the danger of federal monies. And somebody has to say stop. I just don't know when it's going to happen. Hour 2, dead ahead. For decades prior to Joe Biden, says Donna, the feds required MOEs, maintenance of effort, to require states to spend some of their own money to get federal dollars, basically a match. Now MOE becomes maintenance of equity. And they will decide if it's equitable enough or not. And that's what's going on with the state of Alaska right now. The state did what, spent the money from the federal COVID funds for schools and everything else. And the federal government came back and said, well, you weren't being equitable. You actually reduced the money that went to some of these schools. And they were like, well, we didn't reduce the per student. It was just that the enrollment dropped because everybody was enrolling their kids in homeschooling or just pulling their kids out. And so we base everything on a per student formula, and they received less funds because they had fewer students. Well, that's not fair and equitable. I believe, I believe that's fair and equitable. I mean, it's one of those things. Okay. Yeah, tariffs. That's actually, and Fat Ray's right. That's how they funded before there was an income tax. The government was funded on tariffs and fees. That's how the whole thing was funded. Sorry, I'm just reading this thing, Henry says, speaking of Firearms Friday and the invasion of the whole foreign military divisions, you need a new perspective, like Natasha said, with the new weapons technologies like drones dropping bombs and robot dogs, the machine guns on their back. Firearms Friday becomes like bow and arrow Friday against remote controlled bomb dropping drones. Where are the watchers, Mike? I mean, I love these people who are like, we're so technologically advanced, we could never fight back against the government. Tell that to Afghanistan. How did that work out? I mean, not only are we some of the most ingenuitive people on the planet and passionate people on the planet, I mean, how did that work out? The world's greatest nation fought in Afghanistan for 20 years and finally pulled out. Still didn't subdue it. Still didn't subdue the whole thing. With all their guns and bombs and planes and nuclear weapons and F-16s and robot dogs and everything else. I mean, it's just, there you go. Let me go over here. I want to go over here and I want to send an email. I want to send a text message. Just send a text message. Okay. Gosh, I hate it when I'm well, it would have been last week, right? Okay. I'm trying to figure out where. There we go. Okay. All right. Looking good right now. We're still in the commercial break, and Aaron Smith has now popped into the chat room. He's in the green room right now, sucking up all my virtual donuts and coffee. Doggone it. Man. Leave me the ones with sprinkles. Let's go over there and check in with him to see what he has to say, make sure his audio and video sound good, and we'll get things rolling on. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm well. How about yourself?
Whoa, you're loud and proud. Hold on. Let me pull you down. You blew my eardrums out here. Hold on a second here. Let me let me fix that for you here. All right. No, we're doing good. Are you ready to dive in on this?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. I have got you pulled way down. I don't know if you can pull your microphone volume level down on your end a little bit because you're kind of over modulating. You're kind of blowing away.
Yeah, it's just on my laptop. Maybe I could change the audio
Oh no, there
source.
we go. No, I pulled you down far enough. I think we got it. I think we got it
Oh,
now.
that's
You were distorting a little bit, so you don't have to talk too loud. Just talk in a normal voice, and we should be good to go. I'll adjust it from my end.
great.
All right, Aaron. Well, we were just talking about the dangers that we just spent the last 30 minutes talking about the dangers of federal money,
Yeah.
and what it does. Because I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on in Alaska with our fight over the federal government over the COVID funds that we spent, and the fact that they don't think that we followed their unique federal guidance in equity. But it's an interesting. I'll drop you a link in the private chat there up on the right hand side there. I'll drop you a link so you can see it. But this is the story, that part of what we were just discussing right there. And it kind of dovetails nicely into what you wrote in your article as well.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that. All right, I'm going to pull you back into the green room, and we're going to be back in just a second. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Back with more right after this.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the interwebs at michaeldukeshow.com and across the great state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Also, of course, simulcasting live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch every day, and podcasts available wherever you find your podcast. I like Spotify, but you choose you. You do you, boo. That's how we work around here. All right, coming up on hour 2 on this beautiful Thursday, and we are now going to dive into it with our next guest. We just finished up talking about the dangers of federal money, and it was the perfect segue and precursor to our next guest, Aaron Garth Smith, who is the Director of Education Reform at the Reason Foundation. And he's written a piece here. He's actually written a couple good pieces on Reason, one talking about school choice for special needs in Arizona. But the other one that really caught my eye was the discussion about how COVID cash, COVID money, which we were just talking about here in the state, how it's tied our hands and created real issues, how COVID cash has crippled K through 12 schooling around the country. It's created a financial chaos. And we're going to talk right now with Aaron Garth Smith again from Reason Magazine, and he joins us right now. Hello, my friend. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself, Michael?
You know, not too bad. Not too bad. We're talking about some of my favorite topics, which is the dangers of government money. The first taste is free, Aaron. The first taste is free. And then once you're jonesing for the next fix, you'll do anything for it. And that's kind of how we're feeling right now. So let's talk a little bit here. Walk us through this article and talk a little bit about what is happening, because what you're going to talk about, I'll tell you right now, because I've obviously read the article, has been paralleled here in Alaska to a great extent. And so I may interrupt you occasionally to interject the Alaskan perspective on that. But walk us through the article and talk to me about the premise, and let's just go through it.
Yeah, so basically you have the situation where calls for more public education funding are growing louder across states. So lawmakers and public school advocates in states like Texas, Pennsylvania, New York, and many others are saying, look, we need more money. We're in a state of crisis, and we don't have enough cash to serve our kids effectively. But the thing is that public education spending is at record levels. So never before have public schools have been better funded. And this was true before the pandemic in 2020. And it's been true every year, or it's been true every year since that time. So across the country, 2022, which is the latest census data that's reported, public schools on average were funded at just under $19,000 per kid. And you have states like New York that topped the list, spending about $36,000 per kid, and in states like New Jersey, Connecticut, Vermont, Pennsylvania, all spending well in excess of $25,000 per student. So there's a lot of cash in public schools. And since the pandemic started, the main driver of this has been the federal COVID-19 windfall that public schools received to the tune of about $190 billion. So this was given out over 3 waves, with the largest being about $122 billion as part of Biden's American Rescue Plan in March of 2021. But here's the thing, despite having so much money, it's true, public school budgets are a mess across a lot of states. And really there's 2 driving factors. The first factor is they're headed for a fiscal cliff right now. So as I mentioned, they got a lot of money from the federal government, but those dollars are set to expire in September. And so for school districts across the country that used these dollars for somewhat sensible things like academic recovery, tutoring, or addressing teacher shortage areas like math, science, or special education, that's probably not that big of a deal because they've planned for it and they've understood that this is one-time temporary funding. But the problem is there are a lot of school districts that didn't get that memo and or just completely ignored it and decided to use federal one-time funding on things like adding staff or teacher pay raises that are permanent.
And really,
so we're in a lot of trouble.
In all honesty, I mean, the federal government even said, their guidance said, and the billboards, they held up big billboards that said, this is one-time funding. So if you want to build up your distance learning stuff, you want to get iPads for the kids, you want to do this one-time stuff, like you said, you want to do recovery, that's all great. But don't use it on reoccurring costs. I mean, that was like the big flashing neon, don't use it on reoccurring costs. And for example, here in the state of Alaska, the city of Anchorage then took all that COVID money and used it all to fund the teacher salaries so that they could take the teacher salaries and use it to expand other programs. And all of a sudden, gasp, we're $96 million in the hole. What do we do now? I mean, this was completely predictably preventable.
Absolutely. And now you throw some more fuel on the fire, right? Because you have a situation where public schools have lost a lot of enrollment, and generally speaking, public school funding is tied to enrollment levels. So if your funding goes down, generally your funding will go down. And across the states, there are now 1.2 million fewer students in public schools than before the pandemic. So that's a loss of about 2%, which is quite massive. And the bad news doesn't stop there. Public schools are going to be losing students through most likely 2030, according to federal projections. So we're actually going to see millions of more students exit the public school system in the next decade or so. So you have a lot of school districts that are struggling with this. LA Unified is sort of the poster child. So they've lost 50,000 students since the start of COVID-19. And what did they decide to do? Well, they spent their one-time federal cash, billions, by the way, on on adding over 1,000 new staff, teacher pay raises. Their service employees went on strike for 3 days and shut kids out of school, and they got pay raises in more hours, and so they've used it extremely irresponsibly. And it's not, you can't just point the blame at the districts. There's a lot of special interests there that are strong arming them, and now their budget's a mess, and California is facing fiscal constraints of its own. So they're in a world of a fiscal pain ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the problem is this decline in enrollment is nationwide. And here in Alaska, we're definitely feeling it. We saw a 33% increase in homeschooling and correspondence schooling in the state of Alaska during the pandemic. And it just got bigger. Now about 25,000 students in the state of Alaska out of 138,000 students are homeschooled or in correspondence or some kind of allotment program. And that has got everybody, they're in a lather, because now they're facing issues, and this won't just be us, this will be across the nation, of the potential for school closures. In fact, we just had in Fairbanks up in the interior of Alaska, they just decided they have to close at least one school, probably two more. And of course, then there's this hue and cry of, why would you close my school? It becomes an emotional thing. It's, there's no there, but this is not the end. This is the beginning of that. As that decline continues through 2030, there's going to be schools closing all over the country.
Yeah, that's right. And as you mentioned, it's a politically fraught process. It's very hard, but also absolutely necessary to close schools when enrollment declines. But a lot of school districts across the country will just kick the can down the road, and they'll have underutilized classrooms. And the problem there is it just spreads resources thin. So you have your schools that are fully enrolled or near full enrolled that are subsidizing the schools that are near empty, and that does cause some problems. But yeah, that's going to be something that public schools deal with for some time. And I think you never say there's a silver lining to something like a pandemic where a lot of lives were lost, and you had these unnecessary school closures that resulted in widespread learning loss, right? Like I think in math, the typical third to eighth grader lost about a half a year in their math skills, and in reading, it was about a third of a year. But if there's really any positive to come out of it, sort of like you alluded to, is that I think a lot of parents are waking up to the fact that they have options. They can take control of their kids' education, and you see just wonderful things happen across the country, like homeschool co-ops flourishing, more micro schools, and a lot of states have also passed school choice policies, right? So now we're up to, I think, 12 states that give universal access to school choice. And this is a big deal, right? Before the pandemic, that number was zero. There were a lot of school choice policies, but they were narrowly targeted to either students with disabilities or low-income students. And of course, you're going to prioritize access. It's right to prioritize those groups. But what these new policies have done in the last few years is give everyone access. So middle-class families now don't have to buy their home based on what the school option is. They can access an education savings account or a voucher and go to a private school, or set up their own micro school, or homeschool. Use those dollars for homeschooling, and it's a wonderful thing to see. And where I live in Arizona is at the forefront of it. So in Arizona, we have a universal education savings account program. You see probably hundreds, it's hard to get good data, but probably hundreds of micro schools, popping up across Phoenix alone. And a lot more families are homeschooling. And again, it's hard to get good up-to-date data on that, but by all accounts, I want to say a good estimate for national homeschooling would probably be about 4 or 5% of students right now, which is big.
That's big.
That was around, I think, 2.5%, and so a lot more families are awake now.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot. And then, of course, Alaska is this outlier where they've got, 24% of their student, population in some form of correspondence schools. And, you're right. The pandemic was horrific, through death, the lockdowns, the economic consequences, the educational consequences, the loss of freedoms. But I've said it since the very beginning. The two silver linings that I see that came out of it was, one, people's eyes were opened to how easy it is, especially with technology, to be able to educate their own children, because they were told for years, oh, it's just too hard. You can't homeschool. You don't have the education. You can't do it. And then they were forced to do it and discovered it wasn't wasn't that big a deal. And also, of course, remote work. That was the two things that I think those are the two silver linings that came out of the pandemic, as people figured out that they didn't have to be tied down through technology. They didn't have to be tied down to their location for their home or where they worked or everything else. And I think it's really the one good set of things that came out of that. And I agree with that. I want to talk a little bit about school choice, and I want to continue the discussion on this article. We're talking with Aaron Smith, who's the Director of Education Reform for the Reason Foundation. And we're going to be back in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show continues. Your home for common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We continue with Aaron Smith right after these messages. Don't go anywhere.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
All right, we're in the break right now. Aaron Smith is our guest. If you have a question for Aaron, feel free to ask it. We'll answer it during the break. We kind of try and change the subject during the break, Aaron, so that we don't repeat ourselves for the podcast later on. Folks are listening on the podcast later on. Somebody asked a question here. Ron says, ask him if there's a way to stop and even reverse what John Dewey and his colleagues had implemented. I must admit, I do not know what Ron is asking about there. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Aaron.
Yeah, he's probably just, referring to the factory sort of standardized model of education, where
the Prussian model. Yeah, the Prussian model of education.
Which dates back well over, a century. And I think it's very difficult to do, I think, internally in terms of reforming public schools. Public schools are very set in their ways, and you can, try to innovate and change things around the edges, but you're not going to change the core of how they operate, which is 20, 25 kids in the classroom, sitting at desks, all learning at the same pace, right? So you have your struggling student sort of getting the same material as your, the brightest kid in the room, and then everyone in between, and moving in lockstep. And really that model is based on things like seat time, right? Where you have, I think, 180 instructional days and a certain number of hours that you have to comply with. When in fact, we know in this day and age that all kids, have unique interests and abilities and aptitudes, and they all learn at different paces. And so it doesn't make sense to the extent possible, it doesn't make sense to, put them all in the classroom and shove the same material down their mouths. There might have been a time where that was necessary. If you're going to try to educate kids en masse, like you probably need to standardize some things. But especially with the growth of technology, school choice programs, and parental awareness, which is what we've been talking about, that's no longer necessary. And I think you're going to see a lot of those changes occurring outside of the public education system, both in states with school choice programs and those without it.
Right. Well, because you have to, because it has to happen outside the system, right? I mean, the system has become what I call the education industrial complex. I mean, just like the military one, it perpetuates itself. It protects itself. It doesn't want change. Or the change that they want includes, again, more funding to go for things that have absolutely nothing to do with education of the children. And we no longer need the factory worker children. That was really what it was about, was creating good worker bees for the new industrialized revolution. That's really where that whole, they again patterned it after the Prussian model and brought them in like there. And today, it things like individualism and things are being poo-pooed because that nonconformity blows up their process, and they don't want that. And of course, they don't want any changes in the main school system. That's why people are leaving the system, because they understand that they're having such a hard time making any kind of change. That's why they're actually leaving.
Right. Yeah, it's the awareness that they do have other options. I think that's huge. And look, I think you can't deny the fact that some of it is cultural too, like and values based. They don't necessarily want their kids to be learning about climate change in gym class, and then learning about climate change again in art. And oh, by the way, I'm not being flippant. Like, those are actual requirements in states like New Jersey and California, where climate change has to be infused into every subject, which is, regardless of your feelings on climate change, that's a ridiculous mandate.
Right.
There are other concerns too. We see this play out in the culture wars with the so-called book bans and looking at what kids are actually accessing in public school libraries.
Right.
So,
DEI, CRT, the book bans, all these things. This is all part of the larger culture war for sure. All right, we're 10 seconds from returning here. Aaron Smith is our guest. We're going to continue the Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like and share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all the YouTube-y things. And here we go. We're jumping back in right now.
Public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke Show.
Yes, I'm a pain in the something or other. That's what it's all about. Aaron Smith is our guest today. He is the Director of Education Reform for the Reason Foundation. He also writes for Reason Magazine. You can find them at reason.com. The foundation is at reason.org. His latest piece that we're talking about today is a piece about how COVID cash has crippled K-12 schools across the country. We were just discussing that, and we're getting down into that. The whole point here, and part of the problem, Aaron, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on about this is because all during the last session of the Alaska legislature, we kept hearing this mantra that was being pushed by folks who wanted an increase in education. And unfortunately, it was picked up by our local news media and never questioned. And in point, they kept saying school education funding has been flat since 2017. Now, they were talking specifically about our base student allocation formula, which is the per student funding formula here in the state of Alaska. And they are correct that the formula itself has remained flat for, since 2017. It has not changed. But out of the last 7 years of that, out of 5 of the last 7 years, we've also paid money above that base student allocation, millions of dollars. So the argument is, well, the student, they frame it as, oh, they're not paying anymore. We're not funding education because we haven't increased the BSA, ignoring the millions of dollars. And in fact, one of the analysis from one of our think tanks here in Alaska looked at it and said in the last 18 years, education has increased by 35%, the funding. It's the second largest item in our budget. But the mantra, and you talk about how this is going on across the country, the mantra is we're just not spending enough for our kids. We're just not doing enough for our kids. And that's going on across the country, in part being fueled by this COVID money.
Yeah, and actually, we released a study back in February that looked at pre-pandemic funding trends. So even before public schools got, this COVID-19 windfall from the feds, and what we found was, in Alaska, per student funding went up by over 30% in inflation-adjusted terms. Alaska had one of the highest growth rates or growth rates in the country. And what we found was a lot of these dollars went to really to two things. One would be spending on employee benefits, which is largely driven by unfunded liabilities and teacher pension debt. So states haven't, or Alaska hasn't saved enough money for their teacher retirement systems, and now the bill is coming due. And the other area that dollars are increasingly going to, both in Alaska and nationwide, is just more staff, particularly non-teaching staff. So in Alaska, looking at the data here, non-teachers grew by nearly 10% as enrollment fell by nearly 2%. So you're adding more support staff, whether that's instructional aides, social workers, guidance counselors, et cetera. But your enrollment is actually down. And that's true, as I said, even before the pandemic started.
Right. And that's been part of the problem, is that we ditched. There used to be, back in the day, a mandate inside the base student allocation that 70% of it had to be spent in the classroom. And now it's down at the 50% level. A lot of it's being spent towards overhead and other things. And even that 50% level, a portion of that, they're actually attributing it differently, because now they're counting like IT people and other things as part of the classroom support. So in reality, it's probably closer down to the 30% of that money is actually making it into the classroom. And again, this is not just an Alaska problem. This is going on across the country, where everybody is basically saying, we need more money for education. But we've seen what they've done with it so far. And Alaska, again, all that increase, and yet we still scholastically fall in the bottom of the, 46th, 47th, 48th in reading, math, science, those kind of things, those kind of metrics. And it's kind of a horrific thing to watch, but that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, and the data are pretty clear, right? So not only does Alaska rank low in overall NAEP scores, which is the nation's report card for reading, math, and other subjects, but the spending growth did not produce NAEP growth, did not produce improvements in math and reading scores. So the question then is, if you're going to put more money into public schools, like, what outcomes are you trying to produce, and what are you going to show for it? And if you're not producing better achievement on tests, and I'm the first to admit, tests aren't everything, they're not the only thing, but what are you doing, and how are you going to show those improvements for the new dollars that you got? So there really isn't, across states, our study found there's not much of a connection between funding and improved outcomes, right? There are a lot of examples of states that pumped a lot of dollars into their classrooms and didn't get much for it. And New York, sort of the poster child for that. They increased their spending by about 70% per student over nearly 2 decades, and had flat and declining test scores. And then you have a state like Florida, where funding is like truly nearly flat, a small increase, and their scores have gone off the charts, including for their low-income students. So that's something to keep in mind in these conversations around
Right.
funding and spending.
One of the factors that you talk about in your article is the unions. During the commercial break, you and I were talking, and I mentioned that, I kind of call this whole thing the education industrial complex, because it's followed kind of that same model that the military contractors did in creating something that must be continually funded and must be continually expanded. The unions have a tremendously outsized a power in control of power in these kind of situations. We saw it in California with the teachers union in California, where they refused to reopen the schools until they got all the things on their laundry list, which included social justice and all these other kind of things that they outlined. Talk to me about the effects of what the unions are getting, because you basically said they're getting what they lobbied for. And it's really kind of at their feet. So talk to us about that.
Right. Yeah. So the teachers unions and other special interests, and myriad special interests, I guess, were key in helping shape Biden's American Rescue Plan, which I might have mentioned before, sent about $122 billion to public schools. So Trump's two plans before then and the year before, or I should say not necessarily Trump's, but the bills that he signed, they included, probably about $68 billion for public schools. And Biden came in and, he basically doubled down on it and sent $122 billion, which research shows was actually not necessary at all for safe reopening or anything that was related to a COVID-19 emergency. But the unions were key in getting this passed. And the way I look at it is, they're now getting what they asked for, which is rampant inflation. Economists at the St. Louis Federal Reserve and other institutions have shown that that plan, Biden's American Rescue Plan, directly contributed to the rampant inflation that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years. And so it's hard to pinpoint exactly what that level is, but one estimate is that it's about half of the inflation. Another estimate has it at about 2 or 3 percentage points that it contributed to. And so public schools, face this crisis of not only do we have a fiscal cliff of federal dollars, but now we're also dealing with inflation where our dollars aren't going nearly as far as they went before. And this was entirely predictable, right? You pump trillions of dollars that you borrow, you print, whatever, into the economy. You're going to have rampant inflation. Your dollar is not going to go that far. And this is exactly what the unions lobbied for. So in my column, I was pretty clear and straight, just saying, look, this is what you asked for. You're complaining about inflation now, but this was predictable. You even had a former Obama senior advisor warning in the Washington Post saying, like, hold off on this. This is too much. We're gonna have serious blowback from this, and right now public schools are feeling that.
Yeah, no, and I think again you get exactly what you asked for in that situation, and it shouldn't be surprising, especially again when you look at what they were spending on football stadium upgrades, electrifying bus fleets, social emotional learning, and things like that. I mean, what people are concerned about is that it seems like in all these other things and these nice to haves, the must haves of reading, writing, arithmetic, logic, rhetoric, and reason, the ability to learn, the ability to have accurate thought and reasoning, those things are being left by the wayside in favor of whatever the soup du jour of the day is that they want to teach. And we're getting kids who come out that don't have the basic skills that they need to further educate themselves. That's the big problem. We've forgotten about the basics of it.
Yeah, and we have research and data showing that prolonged school closures directly contributed to the learning loss that we now see across states and with untold number of students. And those students missed out on a lot, and they got all this money, but despite receiving $190 billion in cash, which works out to about roughly $3,500 a student on average, only about a third of districts used those dollars for tutoring, which is one research-backed way of improving student outcomes and getting students up to speed. So rather than taking your students that fell the most behind and using those pandemic dollars in creative ways to get students caught up, the focus wasn't on academics. And you mentioned some of the egregious examples of spending, like electrifying bus fleets, whatever that's going to do for students. But there's, it's even more than that. Even the non-egregious examples were just ridiculous because they weren't focused on students, right? So a big chunk of funding, I think roughly 20 or 30%, was used on facilities. So HVAC upgrades and building repairs and new construction. So even the examples that aren't just blatant waste and I won't say fraud because it wasn't fraud; those were allowable. But even those the sort of the run of the mill spending was just not focused on where it should have been. So, and I blame not only school districts but also Congress. They knew that these dollars weren't needed, especially in that last package of 122 billion. Research showed that public schools had enough money to safely reopen. They'd gotten a lot from the feds in the two packages before, and this was just waste.
Which was exactly what they wanted. I mean, they held this whole thing hostage essentially to get it done. Again, not reopening until they got what they want. I mean, it was literally holding the kids hostage. And that's the unfortunate part. All right. 60 seconds here or so, Aaron, on this final thought before we take a break. So what do we do? I mean, what's the legacy here? What's the learning? How do we turn this around? Or do we, like many parents have done, just basically yoink the kids out of the system and start with something else, because this thing is basically unfixable at this point?
There are a number of components to that, but at the core of it, I'd say, competition. That's been proven. That was proven throughout the pandemic. They had a virtual monopoly on students. They closed them out of school, even though the science was clear, like kids are safe to return and should come back and learn. And people were screaming from the rooftops that this is going to be a disaster for kids and they're going to fall way behind. And that was evident, and that's exactly what happened. And so I think the big takeaway is that public schools need competition for students. And the good news is we're seeing that in a number of different ways, both within the public school system through policies like open enrollment and in charter schools, but also outside of it with policies like education savings accounts and vouchers, and just families taking matters into their own hands and deciding to homeschool or attend micro schools.
Aaron Smith is Director of Education Reform at the Reason Foundation. We're going to continue with him for one more segment. We're going to finalize this. I also want to talk a little bit about school choice because, again, he's been heavily involved in discussions about this, especially in his home state of Arizona and what's going on there, and maybe some of the lessons that we can learn out of this as well. So we're going to continue here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Aaron Smith from the Reason Foundation will continue with us right after this. Don't go anywhere.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, we're in the break right now. Again, continuing with Aaron Smith. Aaron, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, how did you get started in this gig? What led you down this path to being the Director of Education Reform at Reason? And, give us a little bit of your journey here to this, I guess, this process of libertarian thought and where you are today.
Yeah, no, I think that the short version is, I had been interested in libertarian and free market thinking for some time. And for about 6 years or so, I worked for a charter school network in Houston called Yes Prep. So I did analytics, data accountability for them, and had been involved in the school choice movement there in Houston, which was flourishing. And the simple answer is I was a big fan of Reason, and a job came open for a policy analyst position that I was excited about, and I was lucky enough to get that opportunity about 9 years ago, and here I am today.
Yeah, Reason has been shaping my thought for going on 20 years now. There's some amazing folks that ride out over there, and it's a great source of information. And I always try and encourage the listeners to add it to their daily reading list for everything that's going on. This education thing now, just for background for you, I mean, I had 5 kids. We homeschooled them all. In fact, we were one of the original members of the first allotment charter schools in Alaska, which are the distance learning schools. And we put every one of our kids through it. It's one of the best things we ever decided to do early on. And we've just seen that grow. I mean, Alaska is such a unique place in the fact that it's, has to do with, I think, geography. I think it has to do with also kind of that frontier spirit of we'll do it ourselves and everything else. When you look at Alaska, I mean, what do you see as a guy from the outside looking in at what we're doing here and why we have such a high percentile of kids in some form of alternative schooling?
Yeah, no, from the outside looking in, I mean, I think, going back to what I said before, competition is just so important in K-12 education, and public schools need more of it, and research backs that up. So when public schools face competition, they actually improve. So school choice, the benefits of school choice aren't just limited to the kids that participate, whether that's homeschoolers or kids that use an ESA to go to a private school. There are benefits for kids who stay behind within the public schools themselves. And that's actually true of public school choice, right? So there's a policy referred often as open enrollment that allows kids to easily transfer across school district boundaries or transfer to different schools within their own residential school districts. And for a state like Alaska, that type of policy, could be a good one to look at. So, from my understanding, the transfer law in Alaska is pretty restrictive right now. It's not easy for parents to go from one school district to the next. Even if a school district has open seats, they're under no obligation to offer them to a student who resides outside their geographic boundaries. And so, really, a starting point is to begin to break down the mindset of school assignment by zip code, whether that's a public school or whether that's a private school. Just completely changing that mentality is what states need to do. And look, that's what's happened here in Arizona. So I have two young girls of my own, so 18 months and 3 years old. And, in a couple of years, we're going to have to decide on, where they're going to go to school. And in Arizona, we have options. So if we want to send them to a public school, there's widespread open enrollment. We can, choose whatever public school might work best for them. If they want to go to a charter school, there's, hundreds, if not thousands of charter schools in Arizona because, the policy is good here.
Right.
And now there's an education savings account too, and we can, access our education dollars instead to homeschool or attend a micro school or, go to a Catholic school if that's what we choose. But, I'm really fortunate to be here in a state where policymakers really get it.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of policymakers across states, don't get it yet, but hopefully they'll come around soon.
Well, yeah, I mean, because they don't get it because they're being inundated by the unions and the members and folks in the public who are basically being driven by emotion instead of by reason in this. I mean, we talk about the school closures. When they went to close that school in Fairbanks, the Facebook posts were like crying about, oh, I remember that. It was such a great, who do we have to do? Or, what? It's a simple economic thing. When you have fewer students, you can't continue to pay for schools that are empty. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
Right.
All right, final segment here. We're going to finish up with Aaron Smith from Reason Magazine. Please mash the share button wherever you're watching. Share, like, subscribe, ring the bell. Let's do this thing. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Not your daddy's talk radio. Although I think my daddy is in the chat room today. I saw him earlier. Hey, Dad. How you doing? We're continuing on now. Aaron Smith, Director of Education Reform for the Reason Foundation, continues with us. We were talking about his article in Reason Magazine, K-12 Schools Crippled by COVID Cash. We're finishing up with that. You did mention one thing that I want to touch on before we start talking about school choice, Aaron, and that is this projection of national decline in enrollment. You said up towards 2030 is how far they projected out so far right now. So for the next 15 years, they're projecting declines across the country. Here in Alaska, we've had a significant decline in enrollment across the state of Alaska in brick and mortar schools. Many of them choosing to go to private correspondence or allotment schools. But sometimes it's just an outflow of outflow of folks who are leaving the state as well. What is driving this education, this drop in enrollment for this projected 15 years, Aaron? Can you give us the science behind it, the math? What's going on?
Yeah, I think I would point to maybe three primary factors. And obviously it varies by state and it varies by metro area and what school district we're talking about. But one is just demographics. People are having fewer kids, and there's going to be fewer kids enrolled in public schools because of that. Another is because of cost of living, right? I mentioned LA Unified earlier, and it's insanely expensive to live in California, let alone Los Angeles. And, families don't want to live there anymore, so they're moving out. But another key factor is that families are just increasingly choosing private schools, homeschooling, or other alternatives. And by the way, I haven't even mentioned hybrid homeschooling yet, which is another option that families are doing. And a lot of families are doing it and they don't even know it's a thing. But they might attend a private school for 2 or 3 days of the week, and then homeschool for 1 or 2 days of the week, or vice versa. And so there's just so many options for families now, and they're increasingly becoming aware of them. And that's a big driver of the enrollment losses we're seeing in many states.
Well, and and I think that to me is the biggest key right there, is the fact that much of this has to do with, some of it's uncontrollable. Again, reproductive rates, things like that. Some of it is environmental or regional, where it's just too expensive to live where they're living. But I think, again, the one silver lining out of the pandemic was that people discovered that it wasn't as hard. And I think a lot of people were shocked and dismayed to discover that it wasn't as hard as they were sold this bill of goods. You can't do that. You're not a teacher. You don't have an educational degree. You can't, it's too intensive. It's too this, too that. And then when they actually saw what was going on, they're like, I can do that. Right. I can do that. Or in places where it just wasn't even offered, they figured it out and they were like, this is pretty easy. And there was a lot of people on this show in Alaska, which is already heavily homeschooled, that came on and commented in the chat room or sent me emails that said, we had no idea how easy it was. And now how happy our kids are. Several of them, like, my kid's going to graduate early because now they don't have to move at the pace of the slowest student in the class. They can move at their own pace.
Right. And I think another, related factor to that is that a lot of parents are now working from home, or they don't at least have to work in the office 5 days a week. And so there's more flexibility. And then it's just a realization that, our goal with homeschooling or hybrid homeschooling or whatever it might be, isn't to replicate the traditional classroom. We're not going to sit a kid in a class, at a desk for 8 hours a day and buy a chalkboard and, start direct instructing them for 8 hours straight. The reality is, it might take 1, 2, maybe at the most 3 hours of instruction or learning a day to accomplish more than what's generally accomplished in public schools. And so a lot of parents are just, awakening to that fact. And hey, I think a lot of them are loving it too. They're enjoying it. And maybe they're surprised that they would embrace it so much. And you talk to a lot of homeschooling families, and one of the common things they say is, we wish we would have done this earlier. And
absolutely,
testament to what they're doing.
Well, and each child is different. I had 5 different kids that were homeschooled, and each one was different. My oldest son, when I told him, I said, you can do anything. Once you get your school done every day, you can do anything you want. You do your school, make sure your chores are done, anything you want. That boy would get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and burn out a whole school day in 2 hours, and then go do what he wanted to do. It was, whereas my other son, it would take him 5 hours, 6 hours sometimes to get it done just because of the difference in learning styles and everything else. I want to talk a little bit more about school choice. Now, you've mentioned some things. You just mentioned hybrid schooling, which we haven't seen much of in this state that I'm aware of. But you also talk about, we've said, pandemic pods, which have now become learning pods. You said micro schools. So describe some of these different options that are out there, because I'm not familiar with exactly. I think I know what micro school is, but you give me an example of some of the things that you're seeing in different areas.
Well, yeah, micro school, typically they have fewer than 50 students, right, by definition. And they all operate differently and look different. But typically you might have 5 to 10 students in a micro school, and oftentimes it's a family that starts one just as homeschooling, and then it just kind of grows into something, and it grows to the extent where they need to move out of the home and into a church basement or a library room or wherever else they can find facilities. But generally, they involve innovative curriculum like self-directed learning, or they have, they're supported by, companies like Prenda, which provide curriculum and online platforms for students to use. But generally the whole, concept, even though they vary substantially across micro schools, the concept is the same. Is students learn at their own pace. They're unique in their interests and abilities, and micro schools cater to that.
Right.
And it's great because we're seeing true diversity in educational options for families, and that's not happening from the top down. That's happening from the bottom up, and parents are at the root of it.
Yeah. Well, we've seen in some cases where teachers have left the system or retired early, and they've gone on to be hired as tutors to some micro schools or some group learnings. Parents get together and they pay a teacher a stipend to teach, 5, 6, 8, 9 kids of varying ages as well. It's almost like the return of the old one-room schoolhouse in that regard.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it's, like you alluded to, it's great for teachers, right? A lot of teachers want more flexibility, and teaching in a micro school or starting your own micro school is a great way to accomplish that.
We've got lots of options out there in Alaska, although we are, again, one of the largest homeschooling states in the nation per capita. We still have a ways to go. We could use more hybrid homeschool. We could do more open enrollment. We got about 2 minutes here, Aaron. So a bit about Alaska. Tell us what you think would be some of the best options that we could do here in the state.
Yeah, I think at the best option would be to pass a universal education savings account, so that families can direct their education dollars and use that funding for all the things that we've talked about, right? Including homeschooling and attending private schools. Then the other thing is, let's give families more options within the public school system themselves, right? So instead of saying or having this mindset that students need to attend school based on where they live, let's give them options outside of their home school districts or their school catchment areas, and allow for more competition within the public schools. So I would say those two things are probably the most important in terms of having a more diverse and competitive K through 12 education system that puts parents at the front of the line and caters to the needs and interests of kids.
Aaron Smith, the Director of Education Reform for the Reason Foundation. Aaron, it was a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for coming on board and joining us here this morning. I appreciate your thoughts. Appreciate your writing. I hope you do more writing for Reason to get into this issue. I think it's super important.
Thanks for having me.
Hold the line for just a second, Aaron. Folks, we are out of time for today. Tomorrow, Firearms Friday. Chance to talk about 2A issues, Second Amendment. Top Shot Chris Chang will be joining us, plus Willie Waffle for our weekend entertainment review. That's all tomorrow. The Michael Duke Show. Be kind, love one another, live well. I want to give Aaron the final bite at the apple here. Last couple minutes here. Henry, I know you've been talking a lot about foreign teachers coming in and the foreign invasion and everything else. And I mean, look, there definitely some problems with issues where they can't get people into rural Alaska to teach. But again, that's because people are continuing to cling to this school model of, we've got to do it the way that the schools tell us to do it. And you said people don't really have a choice here because there's, the NEA, blah, blah. You still have a choice. You could still have school charter programs. You could still do homeschooling. You could still do all that stuff. So I see your comments, Henry. I just didn't think a lot of them were germane to our conversation today. But I wanted to give, again, Aaron, the final bite at the apple here. So, Aaron, final thoughts, anything I didn't hit on or things we should have caught on to? Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway is that the conversation around public school funding needs to shift from, we need to spend more to let's look at how we're currently spending our education dollars and try to spend them more effectively. And that includes both how dollars are spent within the public education system and also allowing dollars to follow the child to the school option of their choice. So really, in a state like Alaska that's increased spending considerably over time, by over 30% per student in inflation adjusted terms. We've tried that experiment. We know that funding hasn't improved outcomes. So let's try something different and let's try to give families more options.
No, I mean, I totally agree with this. I mean, backpack funding, which is the kind of the ESA where it goes with the student instead of going to the school, I think is a great idea. I think we need more parents involved. As far as actual accountability, part of the problem is that the system just doesn't want it. We had a state senator that they were looking to increase the base student allocation here in the state of Alaska. And he said, okay, I'll vote for it, but here's the amendment. We have to be accountable with the dollars that we have right now that's already going in there. Let's put this accountability measure in. And it was crushed, yeah. Like 17 I think it was 17-3 or 16-4 maybe, when it was all said and done. They just crushed that down. We don't want that. We don't want accountability. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, I think Texas and perhaps to a lesser extent Georgia offer a glimmer of hope. So for years Texas has been fighting the school choice battle, and it's still not quite across the finish line. But every other year, the big issue was school choice, and every other year it'd be crushed, primarily by rural Republicans, by the way. So it wasn't even just Democrats that were opposed to it. Right. Republicans. And so, Governor Abbott, to his credit, has spent a lot of political capital. A lot of the school choice movement has helped out with the grassroots, and they're booting a lot of those anti-school choice Republicans out of the legislature. They're voting them out. So a bunch of them just got primaried, and they're going to, hopefully vote in some school choice Republicans. And so, that offers some hope. Some of it is, you can show the data in the research reports and, try to explain how school choice is good for students. But at some point, you just need legislators who are going to support these policies. And, Texas offers a playbook on how to do that.
Sure. Well, I mean, we just need accountability for the dollars that are being spent. I mean, we're spending $20,000 per student, $21,000 per student in the state of Alaska. We're still getting some of the worst results in the nation. There's got to be accountability. We can't just keep throwing more money at the problem. That's just not going to fix it. Anyway, Aaron, this has been a pleasure. And I hope that you remain in contact with us. This has been a big issue for the state of Alaska. And I know that there's legislators who are in the chat room today who have been watching, and some of their staffers as well. So I hope somebody reaches out to you next session to maybe come in and comment and be an expert witness on some of these issues, because I think, you bring the stats, you bring the common sense, and I think that's what we need as we continue this fight and discussion. I mean, I really would love to see backpack funding in the state of Alaska, ESA or whatever whatever permutation it is of that, because again, I think everybody would benefit. The kids that stay, the kids that go, I think that everybody would benefit from that. So I thank you for coming on the program and being willing. I bumped him last week, folks, because I accidentally double booked him. But I appreciate you coming on board, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks so much. Aaron Smith, Director of Reform for the Reason Foundation. Good discussion, good times, good talks. I love it. I love it. All right, folks. Well, that does it for me. I'm out today I'm out for the rest of the day. Tomorrow, Friday, ready to go. Little firearms action. All right. That's it. We will see you tomorrow. Be kind. Love one another. Live well. We'll see you then. Have a great day.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.